Cryptozoology. It means the study of hidden animals. But what does this word mean?
I realize now, watching this back, that I gave you the definition of a word and then asked you what that word means. I don't know what I was doing here or what I messed up in the editing, but I'm talking about cryptid. What is a cryptid? Okay, back to the regular video.
Is a alien a cryptid? Is a skinwalker a cryptid? No, it isn't. I'm begging you to forget everything you have ever seen or heard on TikTok about the skinwalker. You don't know what this is. I don't have enough time to tell you about it in this video, but trust me, you're wrong. The internet has been quick to obliterate the meaning of most words, including this one. But if you ask somebody like me who has been invested in the paranormal community for their entire life, they'll tell you that a cryptid is usually a flesh and blood animal and or entity that could actually theoretically exist. In reality, though, cryptids exist on a little bit of a spectrum. On one end over here, you have animals that absolutely could and probably do exist. And then over here on the other side, you've got borderline magical creatures that are almost for sure not real, at least not in the way that we typically define the word real. First, the most obvious probably real animals that fall onto the cryptid spectrum are ones like the Tasmanian tiger, which absolutely existed at one point but have gone extinct. However, there are sightings of them all the time, and it's theoretically possible that a surviving population of them could exist somewhere that we just haven't found yet. Stuff like this belongs all the way over on the real end of the spectrum. What about Sasquatch? Well, Sasquatch is just a big monkey. We have plenty of big monkeys. Nature makes big monkeys all the time. This could definitely be real. In fact, there are great ape experts that think that it might be. The Native Americans definitely thought that Sasquatch was real. They call it Sasket and carve it into their totem poles.
Hello, it's editing room Jacob again. I just wanted to point out that the mythology and the folklore from Native Americans surrounding Sasquatch is really complicated. There's a bunch of different tribes that have a bunch of different versions, and there's a bunch of different words for the Sasquatch, but the Sasket is the one that we believe is the one that the white people were mispronouncing to get the word Sasquatch. So definitely look into that. It's well beyond the scope of this video, but it's pretty wacko. Back to the rest.
In the fossil record, we have an ape called Dryopithecus, which means wood ape, and it lived in a hardwood forest just like the Sasquatch theoretically does today. And we know that you can have a solitary ape out in the woods because the orangutan exists and is literally that. We also know that big apes existed all over Asia because of Gigantopithecus, another great ape in the fossil record. Bears evolved in Asia and moved across the land bridge into the Americas, so why couldn't a great ape do the same thing? There are even a lot of similarities in how the Native Americans and the natives of Borneo and Sumatra talk about the Sasquatch and the orangutan respectively. We don't currently have any hard evidence that Sasquatch is real, but if it turned out that it was real, it wouldn't really be very scientifically surprising. We kind of have all of the puzzle pieces on this one. We just can't figure out how to put them all together. So this definitely fits over here in the could be real, but we haven't proved it yet part of the spectrum. But now we're getting towards the kind of weird end of things, and we have stuff like the lizard man of Scape or Swamp. There's no way this thing is real. We don't have any huge lizard guys walking around. We don't have anything in the fossil record that is a humanoid reptile. And yet people claim to see big lizards all the time. And even still, the body seems physically possible. Like, I could sit here and imagine an animal that looks like this pretty easily. Dinosaurs are kind of close. It's not completely out of the realm of possibility yet. But then things start to get very weird. What about the chupacabra? Not this dumb dog version, but the cool version from the 90s. This looks pretty fucked up, but I mean, it could be real. There could be a weird little frog monkey in the jungle. There's nothing in the laws of physics that says that there can't be a weird little animal like this. But the chupacabra was also reported to have psychic powers that it used to hypnotize its prey before drinking their blood, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for an animal. First of all, we don't know of any animal that's Professor X yet. Yeah, your dog might know about when you're going to walk in the door, but he doesn't get up and sit in Cerebro every day. Also, blood is a famously terrible source of nutrients. It's only really used in nature by insects and animals that are so small it doesn't matter, like vampire bats. So you're not going to be able to fuel a 4-foot-tall frog monkey body exclusively on blood. But maybe if we're being really generous, that part of the story could be made up. Maybe there could be an animal out there that kind of looks like this, but has been massively mythologized over time. But now we are about to enter the realm of the truly paranormal on the cryptid scale. Let's look at one of the most famous cryptids of all time, the Jersey Devil. First of all, this thing's body plan is completely insane. There's no way this would ever work. What the fuck is this? Second, according to the lore, there is only one Jersey Devil, so it can't be an animal then, because there's no breeding population. Also, it's been around since the 1700s, so is immortal, I guess. This one is definitely not something that can be physically real in the traditional sense. Then, finally, we get completely off the spectrum when we're talking about something like the Mothman, where we're talking about almost some sort of a spirit, or a being that isn't really an animal at all. In fact, real big paranormal nerds will tell you that the Mothman isn't a cryptid. He's an ultra-terrestrial, a being from another dimension, a completely paranormal entity. As you can see, the term cryptid is a little bit more difficult to define than you would originally think, and it's become a bit of a catch-all phrase for paranormal beings and generally out-of-place animals. Remember how hard this word is to define, because that's going to be important later. Did you know that there's a statue of Mothman in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, home of the iconic Mothman prophecies story? Let's talk about Shinto for a second. Hey, maybe if I break character in between video segments, it'll make me look a little bit more relatable. This video is brought to you by Incline Ciders. Alcoholism. Please sponsor me, Incline. Shinto is the native religion of Japan. Now, at this point, all of the turbo weeaboos and religious scholars in the chat are going to start furiously typing comments because the word religion doesn't really describe what Shinto is. For the overwhelming history of Japan, Shinto wasn't even a word people used. Everyone was just kind of doing the same vibes-based spiritual practice that they had always been doing. There isn't a book like the Bible to follow. There aren't prophets. There isn't one god or figure that you're supposed to follow for one system of ethics or morality. Shinto really is more of a folk tradition than it is any sort of organized religion in a way that we would recognize as members of the Anglosphere that have had our brains completely rotted out by Abrahamic tradition. So, what is Shinto and how does it work? Well, it has a really complex creation myth, just like any other self-respecting religion or folkloric system, but that's not the part that's important for this video. I'm sure you've probably seen one of these gates before. It's one of the most iconic things about Japanese culture. If you go to Google right now and type in Japanese clip art, it's going to be one of the first things you see. This is called a torii, and they're set up as gates around Shinto shrines. One of the main tenets of Shinto is purification. Usually, the series of events goes a little bit something like this, and bear with me, because despite the fact that I'm making a YouTube video on a subject, I'm not actually an expert in that subject. Shocking, I know. The series of events is a little bit like this. You approach one of these gates and do a quick ritual vibe check that is normally something like a series of claps and bows. Then you can walk into the sacred space without bringing in any of your bad human spiritual goo.
Editing Jacob back again with another slight addendum. A lot of Shinto shrines also have these ritual hand-washing fountains that have a series of steps that you are supposed to use to purify yourself before entering the sacred space. Shinto is really complicated, and there are a lot of different rituals that can vary depending on which shrine you're at or where you are. So something to keep in mind as we are going forward. The ritual at the gate and the hand-washing ritual are pretty standard, but it does vary from place to place.
A shrine can be all sorts of things. Some shrines are gigantic, elaborate buildings. Other shrines are just a tree that's kind of cool. There are over 100,000 recorded Shinto shrines in Japan, and they range wildly on how elaborate they are. Shrines are dedicated to kami. Now, a lot of the time when you hear people discussing Shinto, they will translate kami to God or spirit, but neither of these are really very accurate. Realistically, kami doesn't have a very good English translation. Sometimes kami refers to what we would consider a god, like, for example, holy shit, I did not prepare to pronounce Japanese words. Hang on. Do we have another fucking... Sometimes kami refers to what we would consider a god, like, for example, Tsukuyomi no Mikoto, the Shinto moon goddess. Okay, this is a lady who personifies the moon. That makes sense. We have a couple of those over in the West. Kami can also be forces of nature, like the Japanese thunder god here that goes by about 75 different names. This is pretty easy to get too. People love to personify forces of nature in mythology and religion all the time. Kami can also refer to the spirits of ancestors, which is also pretty easy to grasp. People can die and become kami, so what we have here is one word that is sort of a huge catch-all for basically all gods or spirits at the same time. But the thing that makes Shinto a little bit different and a little bit more unique is that kami can get incredibly myopic and specific. You can have a small village somewhere with a shrine that is dedicated to that village's specific kami that is recognized nowhere else. There isn't a set pantheon of accepted kami, and there can be new ones anywhere at any time. Typically in a shrine, there is something that houses the kami. In the biggest and most dramatic examples, we have the kami of Mount Fuji, Konohana Sakuyahime. But it's not always the case that the thing holding the kami is this big. It could also be that cool tree from earlier, or it could be a neat pond, or a waterfall, or a really cool rock. It could also be man-made artifacts like one of these amulets or a mirror. People can even be vessels for kami under some circumstances, like, for example, the highest-ranking sumo wrestlers. Now, it's important to understand that this is a bit of an oversimplification. Shrines are not limited to a single kami. The rituals can vary from shrine to shrine and culture to culture, and this is a very, very complex, thousands of years old folk tradition. In this BBC article, I found there's a quote. "While everything contains a kami, only those things which show their kami nature in a particularly striking way are referred to as kami." And I think that's a really good way to boil down the practice. Have you ever been walking around with your friends in the woods and you see a certain tree or a certain boulder or a certain bend in a river, and for some reason it just stands out? It just has good vibes. Shinto is basically what happens when you create an entire folk religion around that feeling and then keep it running for several thousand years. If something or someone or anything at all really instills a feeling of, dang, that's nuts, you can build a shrine to it. My point here is that Shinto is good. It's probably my favorite world religion. It has all of the things that I like about a religion. Cool nature, cool historical figures, cool mythology, extremely over-the-top, elaborate festivals where you dress stupid and get hammered. Shinto is a beautiful system of folk belief that celebrates the beauty and the mystery in the world and the community that forms around it. And that's pretty dope, if you ask me. Now, by about this point in the video, you're probably thinking, how the absolute fuck is any of this going to loop back around to Bigfoot? Let's cut back over to that Mothman statue. Like I mentioned before, this statue sits in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. I'm not going to cover the entire Mothman story here because it's very complicated and very long, but it goes a little something like this. In the year between 1966 and 1967, the very small town of Point Pleasant was beguiled by all sorts of phenomenon. UFOs, men in black, injured cold, and most famously, the Mothman. This all ended in the very real collapse of the Silver Bridge, which killed 44 people and changed the way that we maintain bridges, and is to this day the deadliest bridge collapse in American history. If you want to know more about this, the original book, The Mothman Prophecies, is the most comprehensive starting point. While this story has a tragic ending, nowadays the Mothman is highly celebrated in this community. Every year, on the third weekend of September, the town of Point Pleasant holds the Mothman Festival, an enormous weekend-long festival where people from all over the world come to celebrate the Mothman, go to the Mothman Museum, hear guest speakers, see live music, and generally just sort of party in the name of the Mothman. In many ways, the Mothman is sort of a patron spirit of Point Pleasant, and this is not the only festival of its kind in the American cryptid scene. Remember the Lizard Man I talked about earlier? Well, Bishopville, the town the lizard was sighted in, also holds a festival every year, explicitly stating its goal is to model itself from the Mothman Festival. The Loveland Frog from Ohio, I found a couple of different festivals for that one. Bigfoot festivals, of course, happen. Oh my god, can you tell I've been drinking? Bigfoot festivals, of course, happen all over the country. Champ, the famous lake monster, has Champ Day. In fact, if a city has a lake monster, you can be pretty damn sure that that monster has a festival. A cryptid like the Mothman isn't just a spirit of Point Pleasant. He personifies the community for people. He is a symbol to bring people together to appreciate the mystery of the world and celebrate life together as a community. In Western Washington, where I'm from, Sasquatch isn't just a big gorilla that might be in the woods. He's a symbol of the culture we have here, a symbol of being outside as much as possible. Bigfoot is the personification of the sound a Rainier beer makes when you open it around a campfire. And this type of symbolism and these types of festivals are happening all over the country. And now at this point you're probably thinking, wow, Jacob, American cryptids and Shinto both have festivals? Excellent work, detective. But I think the comparison actually runs much deeper. In the paranormal community, there are usually three types of people. You've got the ghost people, you've got the cryptid people, who are typically focused on Sasquatch because he's the one that's the most plausible, and then you've got the alien people. Typically, these three branches of paranormal investigation don't really talk to one another very much, but this is changing. In Shinto, there is a force called Musubi. Musubi is the creative energy that links all things together. The physical world around you, the kami, the humans, all of nature, the rest of the universe, everything. Kami are said to be expressions of Musubi itself. Musubi is the invisible, creative force sitting just behind everyday life. In the paranormal and cryptid mythology established primarily by paranormal Americana like the Mothman, and the American UFO mythology that has been building since the 1940s, there's a concept called high strangeness. High strangeness isn't a creative force the same way that Masubi is, but it is, in concept, similar to some sort of invisible, ineffable force that ties everything together. The previously mentioned Mothman prophecy's story is considered to be the most iconic example of high strangeness by many people, including myself. Remember earlier how I said that the Mothman was only one small piece, and the entire puzzle also included stuff like Men in Black and UFO sightings? This is classic high strangeness. Another case of high strangeness that I learned about recently is something called the Pennsylvania UFO Bigfoot Invasion of 1973. In this case, you get both Bigfoot and UFOs at the same time. Of course, you've probably heard of Skinwalker Ranch from the Ridiculous TV show. This ranch has reported to been host to all kinds of phenomenon, from dogmen to UFOs to poltergeists to fat little men crawling out of sky portals. In most cases of high strangeness, a lot of these different paranormal events are married together. This is causing a lot of people to attempt to use high strangeness to form a sort of grand unifying theory of the paranormal that goes far beyond just the cryptid sphere or the alien sphere or the ghost sphere. Everything in the American folkloric system must be connected somehow through some sort of interdimensional force, a mysterious, invisible energy that manifests paranormal events and ties humanity to the paranormal. A high strangeness. In ancient Japan, people that lived on the islands saw the nature around them and thought, there has to be something there. There must be a living force that inspires this. In America, we look at the vast wilderness of the Pacific Northwest or the infinite sky of the Midwest and think the same thing. There has to be something out there. There has got to be a little bit of mystery out in the woods or in the stars. If there wasn't, why would it feel so good to be here? The Japanese created things like the kodama, kami that inhabit certain trees. Here in the US, we created the Sasquatch, a mysterious wild man in the deep wilderness that you might see if you are really, really lucky. But both of these creations are coming from the same fundamental human instinct. It's not really a surprise when you're looking at it like this that a place like Appalachia is so densely populated with cryptids, ghost stories, and reports of high strangeness. It's one of the best looking areas in the country and also one of the oldest, so there must be power to it, the same way that there must be power to Mount Fuji. Now, you might think this is me stretching the term high strangeness to fit over Shinto, but I can also stretch something from Shinto to map over this new type of American mythos that is obviously forming. In Shinto, it's very common for shrines to be around bridges, the edges of rivers, the beaches of oceans, the edges of forests, etc., because it's a folk tradition that works very hard to venerate nature and the natural world. The areas that are borders between land that has been settled by humans and land that is still wild becomes sacred. This is not something unique to Japanese folklore. You can find it everywhere. For example, the term hag that we use in the West, usually to denote a witch, is probably derived from a term that denoted someone who lurked around hedgerows and fences, the liminal spaces between settled villages and the forest beyond. The American tradition of cryptids, UFOs, and ghosts similarly celebrates liminality, and liminal spaces are ones that are said to have higher instances of high strangeness, and therefore are considered to be more powerful in some way. For example, Point Pleasant, West Virginia borders a river which separates West Virginia from Ohio, and the most iconic part of the Mothman story is a bridge, a structure that connects one place to another and therefore is some way liminal. According to the data, your best odds of seeing a UFO are on a Wednesday, right in the middle of the week, the most liminal day. The most haunted locations are always places like hospitals and hotels, the place where people are in a liminal state of just passing through, or in the case of hospitals, a liminal state between life and death. I could go on about this forever. I haven't even talked about the Kentucky anomaly yet. We'll probably do that in another video. And these similarities between American folk traditions and Japanese folk traditions aren't just being recognized by me right now on the internet, they are also recognized in Japan. One aspect of Shinto that I haven't mentioned yet are yokai. Yokai are similarly difficult to define and are very closely related to kami. Here's a pretty good explanation I found on a website. Taoist philosophy says that the same entity can have two faces, a yin and yang, which could change depending on its energy status. When this idea was brought to Japan and applied to Shinto beliefs, the idea became that kami had both peaceful/positive aspects, nigi, and negative/angry aspects, arami. Because of this, all kami could turn into yokai if not respected and celebrated appropriately. In this sense, yokai are unworshipped kami, and kami are worshipped yokai. The tradition of yokai runs really deep in Japanese culture, and you almost for sure have heard of some of the most famous ones, like the Tengu, or the Kitsune, or oh my god, it's Kitsune. Holy shit, did I take 3 years of Japanese? I'm the whitest man alive. Or the Bake Neko. In Japanese folklore, they are no stranger to weird little guys wandering around at night doing pranks and funny bits. Because of this, naturally, someone in Japan thought, what kind of funny little guys do other countries have? And the result is that the Kelly Hopkinsville Goblin and the Flatwoods Monster, which are two relatively obscure cryptids from American folklore, are so famous in Japan that they have made their way into two of the biggest franchises of all time. The Pokemon Sableye is just a Hopkinsville Goblin, and the Flatwoods Monster is the alien enemy in Majora's Mask. For some reason, these two folklore monsters that almost no one has heard of absolutely captivated Japan. My guess is that's because of the similarity of these two folkloric systems being intuitively picked up on. Obviously, in America, the system of folk belief that is currently mounting is very, very new. It's not like Shinto, which has likely existed in some form or another for thousands of years. Traditional UFO lore has only really been building since the 1940s, and while Bigfoot sightings and some stuff like the Jersey Devil date back a few centuries, a lot of the cryptid stories really come mostly from around the same time as the alien stuff. And when it comes to ghost hunting, the recent explosion in ghost hunting TV shows and YouTube channels that popularize all the best ghost hunting folk belief are very recent. It would seem like what we are seeing in the United States currently is a couple centuries of folk belief mixed with some hippie shit from the 1960s New Age movements that is all being synthesized into a brand new folk religion that celebrates nature, mystery, and the human condition in a way that is very, very similar to not only Shinto, but many folk traditions around the world. I'm not a professor of religious studies, but I think this might be the default type of religion humans go to when they're left to their own devices and don't have a major organized religion structuring the society around them. I don't think it's a coincidence that as Christianity continues to lose influence in the United States, especially among younger generations and on the coasts where most of the population is, that people are starting to gravitate towards being like, yo, what if we had a goblin shrine in our backyard? Bro, what if we all go to a field and try to summon aliens with our mind? Most people that celebrate Shinto festivals, for example, don't really even consider themselves religious. So it's clear that these types of traditions are very resilient to the increasingly secular world. If you're interested in learning more about aliens and cryptids and how they relate to the emerging American folk religion, I would suggest you watch my video on a book called American Cosmic, and I would also suggest that you like this video and subscribe and keep a lookout for similar content. I would also highly suggest that you watch a series called Hellier, which you can find for free on YouTube as well. Hellier is a series about a husband and wife team of paranormal investigators and their friends trying to find goblins in Kentucky. I can't really tell you more about it without ruining the experience, but if you kind of get where this video was going, you will probably get a lot out of this series. If you want to see more videos like this one, consider subscribing, and please hit the like button and all of that nonsense. You can also find the podcast I run with some friends called Inherently Optimistic anywhere where you find podcasts, and I stream on Twitch from time to time and have an active Discord community. And I'm at the end of the script now and nobody's paying attention, so I'm going to have to lean over my phone to read it. I also stream from Twitch from time to time and have an active Discord community, and you can find those links down in the description. If you want to support the channel more directly, you can head over to my Patreon, where for as little as $2 a month, you can get access to exclusive podcast content. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.